example that was developed by ARCS and Boomer was that they had given a question. They asked a group of people and they told them that you have invested $10 million to a project to build a plane that cannot be detected by conventional radar, which is also known as a radar blink plane. The project blink.
Discussed it in the lab meeting.
And the project is 90% complete, and another company begins marketing a similar plane, a plane that also cannot be detected by conventional radar, but is also more efficient and faster and more economical than the project that is being conducted by your company. And the question is, should you invest the last 10% of the research funds to finish your plane? And they found that 85% of the participants in the study chose to complete the project even though their aircraft would be not up to par with the competing aircraft. And another group given the same question, but without prior investment, said only 17% chose to complete the project. With previous research has shown that individuals will often allocate resources to a course of action that has previously yielded poor results. In a study by Stahl, it showed that subjects who were more responsible for initial allocation decision that resulted in a negative consequence committed more resources in a subsequent trial than did subjects who received positive consequences. He labeled this as escalation of commitment to a failing course of action. And prior to the research that we're going to explain, her name is Sonia Goltz. Her research in 2001, the literature to Stahl's topic of escalation had focused on individual decision making. And there are a few problems with the research that focus on individual decision making. And one of the problems was that we had problems with it theoretically and practically. Theoretically, because you cannot assume that individual decision making will have the same factors for group decision making, and practical because decision making groups is considered important, and a great deal of upper level decision making in organizations is conducted by groups. And also, another problem is the over-reliance on self-justification, which suggests that individuals allocate additional resources to a failing course of action in hopes to justify their previous decision.
Before we move on, is anyone confused? I feel like some people are confused the whole topic in general.
Yeah, so it's basically just confirmation bias, right? Because they're thinking, oh, if I put this much effort into this thing, then I might as well complete it, because then if I don't, then I would be wrong in my wanting to do this project.
Basically, but then I understand where you're coming from, but that's not where we're focusing on. Like, it's not a matter of like why people choose to do so. Her research, Sonia Goltz, she's comparing how group decisions versus an individual making a decision. So if I'm investing the money by myself versus three of us doing it together, knowing that the situation is escalating to a negative result, will I continue to invest my money in versus us as a group discussing the group, like which one escalates to a worse reaction?
And which one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
right, part of the reason could be confirmation bias, self-justification theory, or social decision theory, but anything further there. But she just did a research comparing what the differences are. Okay.
So
yeah, I'm confused, sorry.
So prior to Sonia Goltz, they focused more on individual decision making, but there has been some researches on group decision making. Bazerman in 1984 researched whether interacting groups were as prone to escalation as were individuals, and the problem was that he only examined only one decision following failure. And also White in 1991, he researched non-interacting groups versus individuals, and his problem was that he did not examine interacting groups. So in Sonia Goltz, she focuses on effects unique to groups, and one of the focuses that she chose was the choice shift effect, which is the tendency for a group decision to be more extreme in the initially favored direction than the mean of the individual group members' preferences before group decision. And a lot of people get this confused with group polarization, which is not the focus of Sonia Goltz, but group polarization is the tendency for the mean of individuals' preferences after group discussion to be more extreme than they were before the group discussion. Do you guys have any questions so far?
Could we clarify the difference between the two?
The differences between choice, shift effect, and group
Yeah.
polarization? So for choice, shift effect, it's in a group discussion, they're discussing an idea, and as they discuss, their choice becomes stronger and stronger towards one side. But in group polarization, it's the individual's choice after discussing with someone prior to the discussion group, and then their individual idea of their choice becomes stronger.
Yeah, so it's like choice shift effect is basically if you or I were in a group together and we agreed to solve problem to we agreed to a solution to solve a particular problem by using the idea C, then both of us would say, oh yeah, idea C is a great way to solve the solution, so let's move forward with this plan. Versus a group polarization is before I meet up with you, I go in thinking that, oh, idea A is my solution and I'm going to push my group towards it. And I go in and talk to you and you agree with me and you tell me, oh yeah, solution A seems like the right idea. So I come out of the meeting thinking, oh yeah, I was so right. I lean towards the extreme side of the solution thinking that I was right before. Is that confusing? Or, yeah?
So yeah, Amy just kind of gave a really, both Amy and Julie just sort of explained a little bit about the synopsis of this experiment by Sonia Goltz. I will just briefly touch base on this and then go into methods and procedures. So yeah, the idea is she wanted to examine the escalation of commitment decision behavior across a series of decisions in individuals and groups. And this kind of gives rise to two hypotheses. In classic escalation of commitment studies, they show decision makers, they expose these decision makers to risk additional resources in a course of action that has resulted in failure. And so this choice shift that suggests that this initial preference among the individuals will be more extreme when decisions are made in interacting groups. So that's why her hypothesis one is groups will allocate more resources to a failing course of action than will individuals acting alone. And for our hypothesis two, again, Amy said that prior to Goltz study, there were no published studies that compared individual escalation to the escalation interacting groups over repeated decisions. But she did mention that Bazerman examined only one decision following failure, and White examined only one post-failure decision using interacting groups. And so the only difference is that Goltz group, she will, later on you'll see, that there will be a series of decisions the participants are exposed to. This will make a lot more sense later. So I have here the independent variable and dependent variable. I'll just touch base with that. Allocation decisions in group versus individuals was the manipulating variable, and the dependent variable is the amount of funds allocated to escalation, induction, division, and post-failure decision rounds. This will make more sense in the next slide. So, okay. So the methods, again, the participants of the study were undergraduates at Midwestern University. It was an incentive for them it was money for those who could best maximize their outcomes on the experimental task. So this task I will explain. It was a financial decision case. Hypothetical corporation, you're given a scenario, which the subject, you or I, were asked to play a role of a new top financial officer in a large technologically oriented firm that has had a declining share of the market. And so the directors of the company have agreed that one of the major reasons for the decline in the corporate earnings lay in some aspect of the firm's program of research and development. And so the direction is that the company's directors have concluded that $20 million of it will be used, will be available to its operating divisions, but the extra funding will be invested in only one of the corporation's 2 divisions. So you have 2 divisions, the consumer division and the industrial division. So that the instructions we're given is that we decide how to allocate the $20 million in increments of $1 million across the 2 divisions of the company over 22 decision rounds. And so in each round, subjects choose the division to which they prefer to allocate at least half of the funds, and are then asked to indicate the actual amount of the allocation. So once subjects make their choice and enter the amount into the computer will let the subject know the percentage increases or decreases in the market share per $1 million invested in that division. And you will also be told, from the screen of the computer, the total increase and decrease in the market share for each division. So I have here success phase and failure phase. The basic idea is that by manipulating the outcomes during the success phase of the task, the experiment would continue to be able to induce this escalation of commitment persistence. So your choice during the failure phase of the task. And so let me just actually clearly define what the success versus the failure phase actually means. So I mentioned there's 22 decision rounds, right? The first 12 rounds of the study was known as the success phase, where subjects were first to allocate and then escalate allocations to one of the 2 divisions. All the decisions made in the success phase, they would receive positive outcomes, but one of the divisions was randomly assigned a condition, and this condition delivered larger average returns, so positive returns, and then the alternative. But in the failing phase, basically, the escalation or the escalation-induced division, which is the one where I mentioned has a greater positive return, was reduced to 0. So in the last 10 rounds, the escalation-induced division dropped to 0, while the alternative choice continued to deliver, but small positive returns, but it's very small. And next slide. So this is sort of the procedures. I kind of want to explain this, but yeah, the participants are assigned a decision unit, either they're in the individual or group condition, or given instructions to perform the task. Subjects in the individual condition were instructed to write down their individual allocation decision for each trial on paper. Participants in the group condition, similar to the individual allocation decision, but they were able to be instructed to reach a consensus decision with the other members of the group. And then they were subsequently recorded their decision on paper and then entered the computer. After the task performance, subject completed surveys on self-justification.
So we have like 4 or 5 more slides after this, but just because of the time and the sake, did you guys have any questions, or was it clear? Just
Can you give us like a 1-minute recap of the main points of this? I think there was a lot more to take down.
Right, so basically the experiment itself was testing, so you guys, so peep subjects were assigned whether in groups or they were in, making decisions based on individual decisions. And they went through the successful phase where they were winning money in the beginning, and then they were put into a situation where they were losing money, and it was escalating, and they were testing how much money would they, compared to individual and group decision, would they continue to allocate their resources to escalating induction. So is that clear? Yeah, and then they were measuring the difference, and Sonia Goltz found that as a result, groups will allocate more resources to a failing course of action versus an individual making a decision by himself or herself alone. So that's the main idea of the experiment.
Other questions?
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, can you please make some connections to the behavioral principles discussed in lecture? Like how this connects to class, or any of the behavioral principles that we have discussed?
So what we thought of how this could connect to our class was on our last lecture about no news being better than bad news. Even with the subjects given information on like that the other choice is the better choice, that even given that individuals, you cannot assume that individuals will absorb that information and use it in a valuable way. So even given information, they would still continue going in the failure course.
Or even given the choice, you still
Yeah.
have to walk this decision.
Can you repeat which group, describe a little bit about the two groups, that one which acted alone and one which was in a group?
So groups are they're 74 individual versus 76 individuals that were made into groups of 3, and they were using a graph to compare it, and it found as a result they found out that interaction groups allocated more resources to a failing course of action versus an individual making a group decision.
Now, getting back to the conversation you and I had earlier, what if the group wasn't interactive?
So here's so this is to summarize non-interacting groups. This is non-interacting groups were the worst, and then individuals.
That's basically not coming out.
So I'm just going to review some non-interacting individuals, or non-interacting groups, I'm sorry, were the most vulnerable to escalating situation versus an individual. And then interacting groups.
So wait, the group that was most, I shouldn't say group, because one of them's an individual. The condition of the 3 that's most vulnerable,
To escalating
Yeah.
induction is the non-interaction group.
the non-interaction group. You sure? So the one that's most vulnerable is,
Most vulnerable is the interaction.
Wait, what do you mean by vulnerable?
So when I say vulnerable,
There's a sub-
they're more prone to making that
Persistent.
persistent and allocating those resources failing towards the
so the ones that persist most,
are the interaction groups.
yes,
Yeah.
okay,
This is
right.
ordered.
And
So
the ones that
non-interaction
persist least are the
and non-interaction.
the non-interaction. Okay, I'm sorry if I.
Oh.
And also one of the other factors that they found was when the bigger the magnitude of the rate, they were more vulnerable to becoming this of allocating resources to a failing course of action. The more money they invested.
In other words, the higher the stakes, the more they will want to get back their money.
Yes.
So if you have to gamble, gamble small.